Today is Wednesday, February 26th, 2025. My name is Braden Milliken. I'm interviewing Jim Harrington in Austin, Texas for the Voces Oral History Center. We are at the University of Texas at Austin campus. Thank you, Mr. Harrington, for agreeing to this interview. Just a couple notes at the top. The raw, unedited recording of this interview will be archived at the Nettie Lee Benson Latin American Collection on the UT campus, where it will be available to anyone who wishes to access it. If there's anything you wish or you don't wish to talk about, we respect your wishes. Also, if there's something you want to discuss, please do make sure to discuss it. Please also let us know if you need to pause the interview. Today we're going to talk about your life experiences. As part of this, we'll also discuss your life, your time as a lawyer, an activist, and now a reverend. So if you're ready, Mr. Harrington, let's begin with your childhood. So can you kind of just describe your family life and family structures as you were growing up?
So we were probably the typical family in that era. And by that I mean that the father worked, mother stayed home, took care of the kids. We were 6 kids. And we were, I would say, looking back, we were probably lower middle class. I guess we lived on the east side of Lansing. We basically lived in an Irish community. So I think in that, and it was my mother was classic, caught up in the typical American society. How she associated, and that kind of stuff. So it was sort of average. We went to the Catholic school down the street, my siblings and myself, and I remember those days we didn't do buses. We had to walk, and so we would be walking through blizzards, that kind of stuff. And of course, when I tell my kids about it now, they just kind of roll their eyes.
What was that like going to a Catholic grade school?
So in retrospect, it was really, really good. I did not realize it at the time, but we had very progressive nuns. They were Dominicans from Adrian, Michigan. And, there are a lot of bad stories about Catholic school and the nuns, but it turned out that these were really good and had formative direction for me.
What were some important traditions that your family had while growing up? They were all Catholic as well?
Yeah. So I think that you would say the important traditions were, getting together for birthdays, getting together for the holidays. Typically, we'd meet at my grandma, who lived maybe three blocks away, who was an absolutely awful cook, but she was just a wonderful, wonderful person. I mean, we sometimes have chop suey out of the can, which probably these days is prohibited by the health department. But so it was good. And we kids, the way her house was set up, we'd put on little skits, whatever the holiday happened to be, little puppets, that kind of stuff. So it was good. For sure. My grandmother doted on us. My mother made sure that we got involved in everything that kids are supposed to be involved in, sports and scouts and that kind of thing.
Would you say your grandma was one of the more influential people of your childhood?
Yes.
Both spiritually and personally?
Yes. I think that my grandmother had an enormous influence on me. I mean, when I look back, I can see that I learned stuff from different people in my family, from my parents, of course. My mother was a quintessential organizer, and then that was great. But it was my grandma that really influenced me, spiritually got me to think about what activism meant. We didn't have that word in those days. She was really very religious. She went to Mass every day, but she was not, she was really open to people, right? Even though she would not have agreed with where they might be in their life, but she was really open, totally compassionate. She would not. She did not drive, because the first time she drove, she went into a ditch. This is back, Model Ts, that kind of stuff. So that freaked her out. So I say that because when she had a friend in the hospital or had to buy something for the kids, for us, she doted on us. She walked. Like she might walk 2 miles to the hospital to see her friends. And she lived very, very, I'm not sure what the word would be, but she spent very little on herself. She was always sharing her money with different religious groups in particular, very parsimonious for herself. And so a lot of those values I can see in retrospect had a great impact on me.
Being from a family of six kids and you being the oldest, did you ever feel that there was kind of a responsibility that was thrusted onto you as part of that?
Yeah, my mother reminded me that I had a responsibility.
Yeah.
It usually came up, you shouldn't act like that, you're setting a bad example, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, and of course I still kid with my siblings, or they still give me a hard time, about middle child or the last kid, that kind of stuff.
So it's kind of carried over into
Yeah,
adulthood
yeah,
a little bit.
yeah.
But it wasn't like a pressure that you felt.
No. I mean, it was more about responsibility. You need to set a good example. You need to take care of your sister at school. You need to defend your brother if somebody's harassing him. That kind of stuff.
Could you talk about what are some of your earliest memories? Are there memories from your childhood that have stuck with you throughout your entire life?
Yeah, a lot. But when I was writing my memoir, I remembered this particular incident when I would go over to, it was called Hunter Park. It was a large field, and it was maybe 2 or 3 blocks from the house. And I would go over. I had a bow and arrow at that time, this kids thing. But I usually went over and hit a golf ball. And I remember one time I was doing this, and this other kid my age comes to me, and he talk, and I let him try a couple shots, that kind of stuff. And he was Cuban, I found out. And then a cop comes and tells him he has to leave. Didn't say anything to me, but he had to leave. So I think it was 12 then. I would have been in a freshman, high school. And so at that time I had already joined, I was in the seminary to study to be a priest. This is my first year, which would have been the summer of my first year. And I was really outraged about this. So I went to city council and I complained. And it was a front page article about it. And then I got word that the bishop didn't like this kind of stuff. So it didn't stop me, but it got me thinking a lot about the injustice and the people who have power sanctioning it. He sanctioned it even to the extent of telling me, this young kid at the time, you shouldn't be doing this. It really sort of outraged me because I was thinking, if anything, a religious leader ought to be speaking out against this kind of nonsense. So that, to me, I didn't realize that until I was writing the book, that really was quite impactful on me at the time.
Were you like a teenager at the time?
Yeah, so it was right after my freshman year, however old you are
15
then.
or something.
Yeah, whatever.
Was that before you started working the summers with the migrant workers?
Yes, that was before, for sure.
Okay, so can you tell me a little bit about those experiences? Because I know you've talked about how that kind of shaped your future career path. So can you kind of connect like how they made you feel, those experiences?
Yeah, so it's a good story. This is about serendipity. So I was in when I was in high school. In our first year, we had to pick which language we were going to study for the next 5 years. And there was a group of us. So the options were Spanish or German. So I, and some of my friends who were, I don't know what you want to call us, upstarts, thought, you know what? If we pick French, they'll have to give it to us. Well, that's not the way the church worked then or now. And so we were randomly assigned languages. I was randomly assigned Spanish. And, just being a smartass as a freshman in high school, really changed the trajectory of my life. And so what happens then, when you're in that age, my folks always made us work. So I had to look for summer jobs, right? And so basically a social worker kind of position opened up with migrants in Michigan, southwest corner. And I thought, oh, that's great. I can get a job. I can use the Spanish that I'm learning. And I did that. So in Michigan, in that area of Michigan at that time, there were something like 30,000 farm workers that would come in that Tri-County area, right in the very southwestern corner. And they came because of basically to pick fruit, strawberries, blueberries, raspberries, all that kind of stuff, hand harvest. 30,000. Almost all were from the valley here in Texas. And so at night, part of our work was to go out and tell them about the health clinics that were available. There was also school programs for the kids so that the kids could go to school while the parents worked. That was always a tough decision for the families because they basically needed the kids to work too. But anyway, that's how I began to get interested in the justice or injustice that farm workers were facing. So totally serendipitous.
What kind of other injustices were you noticing at the time? Like, what do you remember the most from the summers?
So you can't imagine in the United States the conditions that people lived in. They had shacks on the farm, and people would get electricity by running an extension cord from the farmer's house. Water was out like at a pump. If you wanted to take a shower, if the kids wanted to take a shower, you got a hose. Outdoor toilets. And the thing the conditions are absolutely awful. So it's a whole family in one shack. It's not like, you'd have different rooms or anything that they're living in. Very bad refrigeration. And the dichotomy of these shacks being less than a football field away from these ritzy houses that the growers lived in and had and were making off the backs of those people was like, can't you see this? Can't you see this injustice? The exploitation you're doing for your own wealth? It was just like right in your face. But it was an interesting thing about how everybody in that community accepted it. This was the way we live. Mm. And God help you if you try to shake it up, which is what we were trying to do.
Right.
So I got really interested then in farm worker issues. And this was the time that Cesar Chavez was really revving up the movement in California, the boycotts and that kind of stuff. And so a lot of people in my generation, I think a lot of us were inspired by John Kennedy. And a lot of people who were interested in the farm worker movement went to California to work because that was the center, right? But I thought I should go somewhere where people don't have a lawyer. Well, this is before I found out I was going to be a lawyer.
Yeah.
But I need to go somewhere where everybody's not going. And because I had those ties already with the people from the Valley, I decided to come to Texas.
Oh, wow. So when you were growing up, did you know many Latino communities around you, in the religious community as well?
So I knew that there was a Latino parish halfway across town, but I didn't. And in our scout troop, I was a Boy Scout, of course, and in our troop, we actually had a Hispanic family, or father and son. The father was the assistant scout leader, Ruben, who was a barber. So I knew that, but there weren't a lot.
Nothing like
Nothing like Lansing has now. I mean, because so many people settled out of the migrant stream into Michigan, because Michigan at that time was pretty welcoming.
in those migrant communities. Did you feel that you were welcome? Like, did you think your help, and although you didn't know much Spanish, do you think you trying to learn was welcome there? And
Absolutely. People were very welcoming.
oh,
And the thing that always I had mixed feelings about is they always tried to feed you.
oh,
And they're so poor, right?
right.
That you're basically eating food that they would give to the kids. It was really good food. So that was why I have mixed feelings about it, But I learned, so part of my thing was to try to understand and learn culture. And, even though I had reservations about eating their food, you can't do that in the culture, right? I mean, this is how people share. This is how the community shares. So you might have a family that's just really, really poor, and if the neighbor is even poorer, they're going to share their food. So it was, and then, so what I would do during Christmas break was some of us who worked we had a team, and we'd always come to the valley for a couple weeks and go around and meet all the different families and stuff like that. So, yeah. And I think in terms of organizing, it is so important. You have to have those relationships.
Did you talk to your family about what you were witnessing at these?
Yeah.
Did they still want you to keep working there?
They did not object.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way. I think my parents always kind of wondered what was going on in my mind,
Yeah.
generally. So I have sort of this quixotic view in their view. And no. I think they had envisioned me growing up to be the typical firstborn in the family and stay close to home and all that kind of stuff. They did not object. And of course, some of the values I was picking up were from them. They may not have realized it, but
Wow. So, how much longer after these summers did you decide to kind of center your career path around helping people in situations like this?
So I grew up in the civil rights era, right? Very active era. And I think that my years in the seminary reinforced that, because my colleagues, we were all rebels, or my group was, much to the chagrin of the directorship. And so we figured out what we were working at. How do we reinforce what we're doing in a way that is helpful in the civil rights era? How do we do that? And that was a issue that I ultimately could not resolve. I did not think the church was helpful. So I left after college. And when I left after college, I didn't know what I was going to do. I knew that I wanted to come to the Valley because I already built those relationships. But my major was philosophy, so I went off actually came to UT in '68, studying philosophy, thinking that I would be an activist and teach philosophy. It's kind of naive, of course, in retrospect. But I went to the University of Detroit. I got a master's. And then I was doing Spanish existentialism, which Detroit did not have a PhD program. So I got in the PhD program at University of New Mexico. But every Saturday morning, I would wake up and watch Underdog, the old Underdog, not the version now. And I never forget this. I sat straight up and said, "You need to be a lawyer." And so Monday I went and started that process.
And so, back towards like when you were first envisioning yourself as a priest, did you were you able to envision your life as just with the church? Like, were you satisfied with that at the time, thinking like that was the path that you were going to follow? Because you were planning on becoming a reverend, or
Yeah. So I think that process that went on over that 8-year period until I left was really sort of slow discernment. As I became to realize more and more that it was a very tight establishment, structure, bureaucracy, how you had to function. And if you wanted to step outside of this, goes back to the story I told about the bishop telling me not to get involved, right? And I began to realize that's just not going to work. That is not going to work. And it didn't work for my class either. We were in 92 when we started out. When we graduated from college, we were 8. In 8 years, we lost, people changed their minds, right? And of the 8 of us who left, only one went on to be a Catholic priest. So.
wow.
And it's because of that, process of discernment, I think.
And so, when you ended up at University of Detroit, is there a reason you chose that university? Was it because it was a religious college?
No, because it offered the kind of philosophy I wanted to study.
Philosophy? Cool.
Spanish existentialism.
Oh, wow.
Donoso, Anton Donoso was he was there, the professor.
You were already interested in that topic?
Well, philosophy is like religion. It got all kinds of branches of it,
Right.
all sorts of different stuff. And I knew there were parts of it I could care less about it, symbolic logic, and it's like, give me a break. And I think what struck me about this existentialism was much more person-related, right? And then you have these people like Unamuno in Spain that fought against the dictatorship, Franco. Franco wanted to kill him, but for some reason Franco's wife liked him, so she kept him alive. So that kind of stuff kind of attracted me. But I can see now in retrospect that's just sort of the general drift of my life,
Do you think you had the traditional college experience? How do you think that kind of shaped your values and who you are?
So, like Catholic schools in general, the seminaries have a bad reputation in terms of just generally, I think. But we were really lucky because our seminary was what's called a pontifical seminary. It was directly under Rome. It did not belong to a particular diocese. So it attracted guys from all across the country. And you had to sort of compete to get in. And so really, really good guys. I think my education was really great. And I needed the discipline. I needed to be in that situation. But we also built great relationships, I think. I'm still in touch with people 50 years later, 60 years later, however long it is.
Wow. Did you work during college as well?
Yeah. So I did work with migrants. And then when I had to, in order to pay my way through law school, I got to use my philosophy degree. I taught business ethics, which may be an oxymoron. Taught that in the evenings.
Cool.
So, and that helped because later on, when I finally came back to Austin again, I ended up teaching undergrad courses and law classes. So it just sort of
That's cool.
serendipity.
So I know you studied philosophy. Did that serve as more of a religious form of insight, or I mean, you kind of touched on it a little bit, or as a social philosophy that pushed you towards like reformative justice?
So I don't know. For me, if I can kind of separate all that out, it's just kind of all in part of who I am, right? All that kind of different ways of getting to the same place, I think.
And just talking to people and pursuing things.
And the thing is that the injustice is in your face.
Yeah.
It's just there. It's like, man, people can't see it.
Right. You don't need to take a philosophy class to learn that.
No, you just need to listen.
Right. So, did you go to law school at the same university?
Yeah.
And so that was largely because of Underdog, right?
Because of Underdog. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I never realized until actually I was writing the book.
Yeah.
What Underdog is actually what I ended up doing my whole life, right?
Yeah.
Working with.
That would be a good memoir title.
Yeah. I like Badass better.
Yeah.
UT rejected that. So.
So would you say your time in law school was similar? You were hanging out with the same crowd?
No, law school sucked. I
Yeah.
don't know if I can use a Latin term or
sure.
French here.
Yeah.
No, so what I realized, in my classes, I saw that this is all economic competition, right? How do I get into a big law firm? How do I make money and all that? And there a few of us sat in the back row, and that wasn't our game, you know. But then it's when I began to realize that I think law school is simply an acculturation process, because by and large, what you study, you never use. I think the most helpful stuff I learned was how to do evidence in trials, and we had a clinical program. One of the reasons I stayed at University of Detroit for law school is because it was one of the first clinics in the country where you could actually get out and sort of practice law under the direction of a professor. And of course, that was all geared to people who could not afford a lawyer.
Oh, so like pro bono work.
Yeah, it was, and you got credit for it. It would be classwork they would teach you. And I learned a lot. And I think, you know, I really learned a lot. And compared to everything else I learned, and this is a common experience. This isn't just me talking.
Right.
By and large, what you learn in law school is just, you know, and it really comes down to acculturation or self-promotion for your economic well-being later on.
Yeah, you learn by doing. Did you meet people that you would eventually work with or even work against, like in cases?
In law school?
Yeah.
Not at University of Detroit, but I have met a lot of people that I worked against.
Yeah, yeah. So you didn't. There weren't many people from your college that joined your organizations later.
No, I went right from law school to Texas,
Oh, okay.
to the Valley. So
big separation.
yeah.
Did you take on any clerkships while you were studying? No, just those.
I wasn't going to be a traditional lawyer.
Yeah, you already.
I knew what I was doing. You know.
How'd your parents feel about
Oh,
that?
they didn't. Like I said, they just
Yeah.
like, what's going on with this guy? I mean, they were really proud.
Oh, so close.
They were really proud that I was a lawyer.
Yeah.
They weren't really sure why I was leaving Michigan. And on commencement day, when we had our hat, whatever you call the head thing, and then the stoles and all. The stoles were pretty, they're nice purple. But I put a boycott grape thing pin on my thing, and they were totally freaked out.
Oh gosh. So when you graduated, you had already met your first wife, right?
Yes.
Did she went to the same university?
University of Michigan. And
Okay.
appropriately enough, we met at the UFW office in Detroit.
Could you kind of tell me a little bit about how you met her and if her career path was kind of similar?
So we met at the UFW office in Detroit. So every major city had boycott offices where you would go on weekends and pick at the stores and ask people not to buy grapes and all that kind of stuff. And of course, at that time, Detroit was a very union city, right? Auto workers. So we met there and,
Cool.
you know, built a
Kind of same
relationship.
crowds.
And we got to the point where we were talking about getting married, and I said, I'm going to the Valley. You're welcome to come. But
She was okay with that?
yeah, she was in social work.
Okay, yeah.
And she had been a farm worker.
Oh, sick. So it was,
So yeah, it wasn't like it
Perfect.
was a really hard discussion.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know? And that's what we did. We came to the Valley.
and then y'all had your first kid here?
Yeah. Here being the Valley.
Right, here
Okay,
in Texas.
just make sure.
Yeah.
Right here in Texas. And so the oldest one, Elias, he was about a year old, and there was a wildcat strike at the bridge with farm workers wanting better wages and stuff.
Yeah.
So I get this call about 6:30. There's a lot of, it looks like there's going to be some violence. We need to get somebody here. And of course, the person who babysat Elias during the day wasn't available. So I picked him up and took him with me. And there's a front page picture in the McAllen monitor of me holding him,
Oh,
talking to the workers and stuff,
wow.
which he never lets me forget.
Yeah.
And then I actually
That's
handed
cool.
him off to somebody who became his godmother.
Oh,
And he said, "But you didn't know that at the time."
yeah.
He just handed me away.
Hey, that's how things
So
happen.
we still go round and round about that.
Cool. All right, so I kind of wanted to move over into your work as a civil rights lawyer because
Okay.
I know that was a big chunk of your life. So did you find a job as soon as, like, did you come here knowing that you had an organization that you wanted to attach yourself to?
Yeah. So the way that worked, when I had decided that I was going to come to Texas, so about a year before I got my degree, I started looking for work. So I was on two paths. One was I contacted the UFW office in the Valley and said, "I want to come and work with you." And then the other was to do regular traditional legal aid. They had scholarships available that were called Reggies at that time. So I get this back. Both respond, and at the union, they had two lawyers, and one had just left. So they offered that position. The other one, the Reggie, I also got that. And so that's sort of where you have to make a decision between a traditional path and a path you don't know where you're going.
Mm-hmm.
The union paid $5,000 a year. The Reggie paid, I think, 12, 14,
Yeah.
something like that, which was not unusual in those days. The union was quite a good cut. And so it was a decision, what do I do? Going to have a family, all that, all those sort of countervailing things going in your mind. But I ended up going with the union.
Yeah, and do you regret?
Never.
Yeah, I figured. Do you have any stories from the union that have kind of stuck with you? I'm sure you have
I
many.
have a lot of them. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean they're really.
What about when you first started?
So when I walked into the union hall, of course, I thought I was going to file a few class action suits and everything would be
Right.
taken care of, in the United States. Well, it didn't take long to disabuse me of that
Yeah.
idea. But there was the building was a cinder block and no AC, and the valley can be quite humid. And but I knew that's where I wanted to be. So
Did it take long as like a fresh lawyer to kind of wake you up to like how difficult it might be?
I didn't really have a long.
Were you naive going into it?
Partially, the idea that I thought I could do more than I did in
Yeah.
terms of lawsuits. Obviously, I think my strategy had always been to, how do I fit as a lawyer into organizing, right? A lot of lawyers have the idea that they're sort of know-it-all and people can come to them if they want, and they'll see if they have the time to help.
Right.
But my strategy is I wanted to build a relationship with the people. So I would go like on the weekends, and there were 10 acres where the UFW building was, and they were harvesting corn at the time. So I would go and help them do that. I'd go to all the meetings they had to build that relationship. If I got invited to a quinceañera or to whatever, I would go because, and it happened. You build those relationships. So you can tell stories about things, as I do in the book. You can tell stories about funny things that happen that probably would never have happened if you didn't have that kind of relationship with people. Or you wouldn't be able to tell the stories in a way that are really funny, even though at the time they probably weren't funny. But in retrospect, it's something to celebrate.
Wow. Did it take a while to get used to living in the valley compared to living around your family in Michigan?
No, I had already had it in my mind I wasn't going to be in Michigan. I mean, I had
Yeah.
that in my mind for years,
Right.
so it wasn't like. So the greater and the valley at that time was just, beautiful. It's now been developed, they
Yeah.
have condos everywhere and all that.
Yeah.
But then it was just beautiful. People are very nice. The culture was very nice, very welcoming. The only people who weren't welcoming were the Anglos,
Right.
And so really the trick was, how do I keep the relationship with my folks and my siblings, and so periodically go to Michigan. My folks loved traveling around wherever their kids were and see the grandkids, so
Cool.
they came to Texas a few times.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So in 1978, I believe you founded the OLPU, which eventually became the Texas
Yeah,
Civil
yeah.
Rights Project.
It's just amazing how these things happen. Another
Yeah.
serendipitous
Yeah,
thing.
can you tell me about
Yeah.
how that came to be?
So at that time, we were always scrambling for funding, even though, our total budget was like 18,000, for three people, just scrambling all the time for money. And the bishop there, John Fitzpatrick, at that time, was actually supportive of the organizing. And so the Catholic Church, the Thanksgiving collection was called Campaign for Human Development. And their strategy at that time was to fund community organizing. So I thought, well, maybe we can get some money. So at that time, we're connected with the ACLU. ACLU is funding the South Texas project, right? And they're doing it in conjunction with the UFW. So I'm working technically for the ACLU. So I contacted, it's just another crazy thing that happened. So I called CHD in Washington. I said, I'd like to send a proposal. He said, oh, you know what? We just closed today accepting applications. But he said, you know what? Go ahead and send it to me. I'll get it in.
Wow.
And then you have to have the permission of the local bishop, who, if you're going to get the funding from the national. And so I talked to the bishop. He said, yeah, I'll support you, but we can't do it through the ACLU because of abortion.
Oh.
We can't do it that way. So he said, what if I start a separate nonprofit? He said, and I said, then I'm going to send it to the ACLU because they're in ministry and we don't have the bookkeeper.
Right.
He says, fine, go ahead. And that's how we got money we got 4 years of funding.
Yeah, I was going to ask how
Even though technically they give you a trial run for 1 year, and then the most supposed to get is 3 years, but we were able to save enough money that for de facto we had 4 years of funding that came in. It's a good arrangement. We had somebody managing the books, and then we were getting the money. And we had no accountability. We didn't. So, like, even with legal aid, you have more accountability to the local political structure.
So you were working at both it was the ACLU and your new startup at the same time. Was that difficult?
No.
No?
No.
They kind of went hand in hand.
Yeah.
Cool.
I was running the shows. I kind of did.
You call shots?
They all they're all far away. The bishop was fine. ACLU was all, they didn't know that, you sort of had this wild kid down in Texas. So.
Cool.
It worked out fine.
Let's see. So the TCRP has changed and grown a lot throughout time. And you left it, was after 15 years of leadership.
25.
25, yeah. So what do you think about what it's become today and how it's changed from its original mission statement?
This is a view that's shared by a lot of people in my generation that did the kind of work that I did. So I think there's a lot of concern on our part that the ground level organizing doesn't go on, that people are accepting social media as an organizing technique. And social media, of course, is good, but it isn't the ultimate. There's nothing that beats going door to door, going with people when they're doing something, being part of what they want to do. You can't beat that. And I think we lose that. I think, to me, that's a danger. It's not just how I have concern about where TCRP is going, but it's a common view shared by us. And I think, to me, the election vindicates that idea, right? That how is it you have people in the valley who voted the way that they did? And it's because you don't have that on-the-ground organizing. That's hard and tedious. There's no doubt about that. But it has to be done. So I think that's the concern that we have.
Are you involved with your organization still?
No. I mean, the traditional step is that you totally back away, so because you have new leadership.
All right, so I've been waiting to ask about this. Around what time in your life did you meet Cesar Chavez, and how can you tell me?
Yeah,
as much as you can about
so
that?
here's a good story.
Yeah.
Of course, I was in totally awe of Cesar. And I remember the first time I ever talked to him was on the phone. So I was so nervous. He's calling me up to talk about something, right? But the first story. So the UFW is organizing. They're organizing these committees in the colonias in the valley, and every year there would be a convention where each of the organizing committees would send delegates, and so Cesar was coming to the first one. And so what I did, you don't know when you're organizing how many difficult legal things you're going to run into. You're going to run into a lot. So I'm trying to organize lawyers to volunteer, right? So I set up a meeting in a house up by Elsa. I don't know, it was an empty house, and it was cold. And there was no heating in the house. So anyway, we have about 12 lawyers there. And Cesar comes in, and everybody is just, shaking his hand and all that kind of stuff. We start the meeting. He says, he said, I really don't like working with lawyers. I thought, well, that's not probably the best way to begin this meeting. But he was right at the end of the day. Because he said, what happens is that lawyers try to tell me what I can't do rather than telling me how, rather than backing me up when we do something. And I think, I referred to this earlier too, that this is the really important thing that has to go on is that you have to understand what your role as a lawyer is. It's to support the movement. It isn't to fashion the movement.
So how soon after were you taken on as his lawyer? So
anytime stuff came up, and I remember we went to so the UFW had annual conventions in California, so we'd go to those and all that kind of stuff. So we had I remember, this is really, I love this, another story, but during one of the boycotts that was going on, this might have been lettuce, there was a group of KBUC radio, talk radio, in San Antonio. Judd Ashmore and Ricky Ware trashed Cesar as being a communist. And, of course, that wasn't the first time that happened. But in Texas, calling somebody a communist is per se libel. That means, you're entitled to get money if somebody calls you a communist. So I had a bit of a fight with the ACLU over this because it's free speech, but we went ahead and sued, and we're doing the deposition. Cesar's come to town for the deposition, and the lawyer. So both the guys are there, and from the radio station, and their lawyer. The lawyer begins asking questions. Have you been sued before? Yes, I'll say so. He said, yeah. And the lawyer said, well, what happened? Well, it ended because they died, or the grower died. Second case, same scenario. And by then you could see Ashmore and Ware begin to get a little shaken up here,
Right.
you know, about this. It was fun. I got, they settled. And he told me that. So I'm supposed to go and take the family and go north to Michigan on this particular Monday, which was what the judge then decides is going to be the trial date. And I lined up the Archbishop, Pat Flores, to testify for Caesar, and Henry Cisneros, who was the mayor at the time, to testify. So I call Caesar up, and I say, hey, you know, should I cancel my vacation? I said, I can do that. Just let me know. And he says, no, they're going to settle. And sure enough, they laid $12,000 on the table. So
Wow.
that was kind of, so what I really like working with Cesar is that he understood the law, how to use the law better than a lot of lawyers did. Like he sized that situation, right? He knew what was going to happen. But you can see other times that I would talk to him in terms of strategic. I mean, he knew. I mean, you could tell. Of course, he'd been through a lot of it already, right? But he had a really good insight. It was fun.
Yeah.
It was fun. I'd rather talk to him about law than talk to the lawyers.
Yeah.
Actually, at the end of the day.
Would you say that the two of you became friends
Yeah.
after working together for so long?
Yeah.
That's cool.
We played handball here at UT when he came one time.
Wow. So, what was he like? Like, just confident?
So you got all kinds of persona
Yeah.
that go on here, right? So on an individual level, he was a lot of fun. Like I was telling you about playing handball. Well, they played actually with a racquetball, you know, because it's a little softer in your hands. And I mean, we teased about that for years. And at one time, I actually sent him an award with some of a big. What did I send? Maybe it was a tennis ball or something. This is for the UFW team. So he stayed at the house a couple times, and it was like a grandfather to the kids. The kids were all young at that time, and he read a lot. You know, he had to drop out of school because he had to work to support the family. But he always carried a bunch of books about anything. You never know. You know, it wasn't like organizing necessarily, or it wasn't about Chicano history, as it was called at that time. You know, it was just like he just wanted to get as much knowledge about as many different things as he could.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting.
Yeah.
So with the public, you know, when you had public events, what I observed was that he was very respectful of people. You know, and a lot of people wanted to tell him, you know, this is what I did for the union and all that, which I'm sure he heard all the time. But he was just so respectful, let people talk, say thank you, you know, that kind of stuff. So
What about at protests and these activists?
could be a hard ass.
Yeah.
You know, so I think watching how he interacted with other union leaders was really interesting because that was really at the gut level about organizing and oppression. You know, and they all had a common language about this, and it was really hard analysis. It was really, like I said, or if it was a politician, it'd be a totally different approach. You know, so it was really quite an experience to watch how he had adapted, I guess you would say, to the different roles that he had to play.
Over the 18 years that you spent as his lawyer, would you say the two of you shared more losses or victories?
Victories.
Good.
Yeah.
Which victories would you say were the most
So I
memorable?
think, you know, like the three, to me, if I only had one thing to do in my life, if I had that, this would have been enough. And that was bring farm workers under workers' comp, unemployment comp, and the right to know about pesticides. And that was a lot of strategic stuff, particularly with Caesar. With Caesar, when we had to talk about, do we do a legislative compromise that brings coverage in over a 2-year period? We had one to suit. Or do we not negotiate and just force the issue in the courts? which would have taken 2 years. And not the certainty that we would have won in the courts, ultimately, Texas Supreme Court. So going through that analysis with him, and I thought, when I was talking to him about this, I thought I was ready for the really hard answer, just, tell him to shove it, we'll go to court. But he said, no, we're going to work it out. Figure what works the best for the people. And it was the compromise, the 2-year phase-in, that worked the best. So those cases that to me are really important in my life is that, worked with him too, and a lot of strategy.
At that time in your life, what would you say that your biggest priority was? I mean, your family was growing, but you also had all these organizations that were growing under your leadership. Was it hard to grapple with all of it moving so quickly?
So I think a couple of things go on. My goal was always to integrate the family into what we were doing. So I always had the kids come to the pickup line. Always go to the union meetings, right? So I tried to, and at the same time, make sure we would go camping or go to the beach or, and that kind of stuff too. But I didn't look at it that there was two things going on. It was just part of my life.
Cool. What were some of the biggest challenges that you have faced in your life, both professionally and personally, that kind of made you who you are? If you could boil it down to like moments of things, like were there any cases that really made you question if you were doing what you were supposed to be?
Well, certainly when you lose a case, I mean, we lost cases and some that were really, so I mean, 2 cases that we lost in which the person had died. A woman that was coming across from Mexico who lived in Texas but went over to get someone. She had like 9 kids, and she was pregnant, and she wanted to get one of her relatives to come over and take care of the other kids who are all small. And they stopped her at customs at the border and harangued her, and she had a stroke and died right then. And we lost that. It's just, how do you lose that? And then when you wonder, I mean, the dad was not a good person. And so you always wonder what happened to the kids. Here they have nothing. Their mother's gone. Their dad is not going to be any help. Then we had another case in Austin where these guys were target shooting at night in a ditch over by Crockett. This is back when that was still all rural area. And Austin cops came and decided what they were going to do is run down the hill yelling at the kids and scare them. And of course, that totally freaked out the kids. So you have one kid particularly running one direction, and the cop shoots him in the back. How do you lose that case? And I talked to the juror afterwards, a woman who was the presiding juror, and I said, and she worked for hospice. I had thought, and I said, why? She said, well, they shouldn't have been out after curfew. I mean, where's the logic there, right? You can get killed if you're out after curfew. That Austin didn't really enforce. I mean, technically there was a curfew, but so that kind of stuff is when you really think, did I do the wrong thing? Did my ego get in the way of how I was doing the case? I mean, you have a lot of, that's tough to go through that.
At the picket lines as well, were there times where you encountered violence and pushback that was hard to be around?
So a lot of the pushback you would get was just stupidity,
right?
Bigotry. And sometimes people were trying to pick a fight. But one of the tenets of the UFW is nonviolence. So, I mean, and a lot of people who are picketing hadn't gone through worse situations in California and organizing. It's hard to be nonviolent. Martin Luther King actually sent people to get trained in nonviolence.
Mm-hmm.
It's really, really hard. I remember once I got really angry. I was on picket line in Alamo, and one of the store workers, it was just some punk, sprayed one of my kids with a hose, and I got so pissed off. And so I really understood, you have to, this nonviolent thing is really tough. It's really, really tough.
So how did you overcome those challenges like that? Like the times that y'all would lose? Like how did you keep going?
Oh, I don't know. I get asked that question all the time.
Really?
I just keep going.
Let's see. So how much, because y'all did have those victories and kept pushing, how much do you think that your work has led to structural improvements in Texas or in America?
So I think, yes, a lot. Farm workers, between them and construction workers, depending on the season, is the most dangerous occupation. And farm workers are not covered by workers' comp, but construction workers are. And what is really important about workers' comp is that most of the injuries that you sustain keep you out of work maybe 2 or 3 weeks. They pay the doctor bill, right? That kind of stuff. If you don't have that, then two things are going to happen. One is you're going to have to go begging for food. And the second thing is you're likely not to go to get medical care, and your situation will get worse. I think structurally changing that is very important, and including farm workers under unemployment law was very important, because it's, again, the same situation as construction. If you're doing construction, there'll be periods of time where you can't work, or the job ends, or whatever, and you get paid for that. Farm workers, the same thing. Depend on the weather, the job ends, whatever, right? And so not only was the structural changes good in terms of farm workers, but it was also good for the community, because how farm workers would get supported when they were hurt or unemployed is they'd have to go begging, right? Get family members who are already poor, or go to the churches who are overtaxed because the valley is enormously poor. I think I heard, I couldn't find this when I was writing the book, but I remember somebody in the government telling me that like $1.5 million flowed into the valley in 1 year by the farm workers being covered by workers' comp. So it was also a benefit to the community, right? It didn't further tax the community. So I think, and then I think we changed the grand jury system in Texas. That had been really sort of in the domain of white men with money, white men with money, and changed that. So now you have to randomly select grand juries. That was a big one. That was a big one, because, as you know, a lot of people end up getting convicted who aren't guilty. The statistic is that if you're indicted or charges filed against you, it's 60 to 80% chance you're going to be convicted, whether or not you're guilty, just being brought into that system. And a lot of people try to get out of it quickly and will accept a plea that has consequences further on down the line. So that was a big structural change. Another structural change that we did that I think is enormously important is we had privacy declared to be a fundamental right in Texas. That's a legal term, what a fundamental right is. It is not privacy is not protected under the federal Constitution as a fundamental right. And you say fundamental right, that means the government cannot interfere with your privacy except for what we call a compelling state interest. These are legal terms, but they do have great significance. and then establishing privacy. So we we did this through banning polygraphing of public employees. So when you do a polygraph, part of the game is to ask you what are called control questions, which are deeply personal and embarrassing questions with the idea that you're going to lie. You're not going to be honest. Mm-hmm. And then the person, the polygrapher, looks, then he hooks you up and he looks at it and says, oh, you're lying. And it's statistically, it's like flipping a coin, whether you know. But that person then fashions the rest of your life. No, you can't be a cop. No, you can't do this. No, we're going to fire you, right? That arbitrary invasion of your privacy fashions the rest of your life. And so we were able to ban them in Texas under the right to privacy. I think another thing that had great structural importance was also our very aggressive campaigns to enforce the Americans with Disabilities Act. That started off with this woman who was Opal Petty, who, when she was a teenager, 16, had sort of a episode of depression. Her father was a deacon, Baptist deacon in Goldthwaite, very conservative. Didn't know how to deal with her. They tried praying over her. That didn't work. So she had this episodic thing go on. Depression. She was, at one point, she was digging her own grave in the front yard. And so her dad takes her here to Austin, the Austin State Hospital. She ends up confined 51 years, even though this was an episodic occurrence. And of course, that ruined her whole life. So we sue, but not only did we win for her, but we changed that system. So every year, there has to be an evaluation of everybody in custody as to whether it's beneficial for them to remain in custody or not. And here's the thing. The best we could figure out is that they kept Opal there because she was a good worker in the laundry. You know, a lot of people are acting out when they're in confinement because of their mental illness. She was totally passive. Just everybody liked her. And I it's hard to be this cynical, but I think at the end of the day, that's the best I could figure out what was going on. When we won the case and she started living with her niece, when they took, so it was just by accident that the niece finds out that she's in custody. It was a family secret. So she decides, the niece, to call all the mental institutions around the state to see where Opal was. And it turned out Opal was like 15 miles away from her. And when Opal was finally released, they stopped at a grocery store in the fruit and vegetable section. And Opal runs up and down the aisle. She has never seen color of this kind in her life. Think about that. When you go into the store, how beautiful and all that color and everything. You know, think about living within the walls of, you know, bathroom blue or bathroom green that we used to see in the institutions, you know, and not having that choice about what you're going to eat, that kind of thing. You know, it was really sad, you know, and it just, and what Linda did, that's the niece, when the case was over, she took Opal on a trip to Disneyland on the train. It's a great story. It's a great story. But here's the sad thing also. So we do this, we get the yearly review, the agency has to also do the review right then, and then every year thereafter. There were, I think, I can't remember exactly the number, like 400 people that had no place to go, but should not have been in the institution. And so they have to stay there because they don't have the family connections that Linda built up with her aunt, that kind of stuff. And just to think of that the state would do that. Well, it's Texas, But I think that was a really important structural change that the lawsuit brought about.
Wow. I mean, although there's like y'all made all these changes, there's always more stuff going on in present day. So do you ever miss being in a similar position to where you can fight that, or do you feel that you can kind of approach it differently now that you're in a different role in your life? Now that you're in your priesthood, do you feel that
No,
you can
I wish every day I was still doing this, right?
Really?
Yeah, of course. But I also have to understand that, as we say in Spanish, la bola de años catches up to you, and part of our job is to pass on to the next generation. We can't hang on to it. But I miss being in court big time. But I do what I can do now. I mean, whatever I can do.
How would do you encounter like different challenges now that you're in a different career, I guess, like, and now that you're in your priesthood, are you still trying to help people in the same way that you were before, but
Yeah.
it's posing itself differently?
So, I mean, being back in the church structure is still problematic for me, right? Even though it's a lot looser than it was 50 years. It's still problematic for me. But I'm actually in a position where I have a lot of freedom to, work on immigrant issues. So that's what I'm doing. What I've noticed, this is what other retired lawyers notice, is that you don't have staff. So, like, I have to do everything myself, and I have to say that my computer skills leave a lot to be desired. But I also have to recognize that I am where I am, and this is where I am in my life, so I have to live with it.
Do you feel that you had more power to affect things?
Yeah, so people certainly have a lot more respect, even today, for me as a lawyer than they do for being in the clergy. It's really interesting to me to see that, but clearly. And I think that's because the lawyer has more potential to make change. I think maybe in the clergy you have to convince people who don't seem to ever get convinced. And then the law makes people do stuff, which I think is really important. I think it's really important. There was always that debate in the civil rights movement between the more conservative and the more activists. It'll change over time. But what I saw teaching here at UT, undergrad, and I guess in law school, both, is that the push of the law to create greater diversity in the university was really evident. And it would not have happened without the litigation. So, and of course, I think that's why we have the reaction now to DEI, as it's called, is basically resegregation, because it was so effective.
Do you think you could talk about that for a moment, about how you feel about current social liberty issues that Texas is facing? I guess in terms of DEI.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to use the DEI because it's so poisoned right now, but it's a code word for we're going to resegregate. And that's all that it is. If you look at what is going on, and you see, like just in the military, the impact that this has had over the years, ever since Truman, and how it's benefited people. And then to come in and remove the top general because he's black and did what he was told to do by the same president 4 years or 5 years ago. What else is there? Or saying that we're going to give refugee status to white Afrikaners. I mean, what is that about? You know, who are we pushing out of the country and who are we bringing in? I mean, you go through the whole list. But in my view, this is really resegregation, because part of integration is sharing the pie. And those who have the pie right now, or the bigger pieces, aren't into sharing.
So to build on top of that, from working with Cesar Chavez to organizing with other lawyers to file a complaint against the Texas State Bar to stop Ken Paxton from practicing, there have been many victories and steps towards justice in your career, because there's always issues to fight. Can you tell me about what your most difficult case to work on was?
Oh, that's a good question.
I mean, you told me about some ones that were difficult because you lost.
Yeah.
But maybe on a technical, like,
yeah,
it
okay,
required the most work.
Okay. Or maybe the least work because it didn't have any law to rely on.
Sure. Yeah.
So we sued the State Bar of Texas to require the bar to tell lawyers they had to do pro bono work, help people for free. And so we litigate that, and we get poured out by the Supreme Court, which says, yes, there is a problem. We'll put you on the administrative docket, docket being the agenda, and we'll discuss it, but you can't litigate it. And every year, at the end of the year, I would write them and say, hey, what's going on with the administrative docket? And so finally one year I called, and I actually called and I talked to the clerk, and the clerk says, we don't have an administrative docket. I said, well, the court said we. So anyway, at the end of the century, almost to the hour, we filed a suit against the Texas Supreme Court for basically promising us something that didn't deliver. The chance of winning that case was like minus. And a lot of people considered it to be suicide to sue the Supreme Court. But it embarrassed the court, which was really the agenda. I mean, what do you mean suing the Supreme Court? So, all this publicity. And it's because they promised something and didn't deliver on. And the situation is really bad because a lot of the cases that poor families can't deal with, or like you have divorces or child custody, just rental, all that day-to-day stuff. And you have to have a lawyer to navigate. Anyway, so we have they said, finally, so we give you a hearing. And so we have it in the Supreme Court itself. And it was so bizarre. The court was good about it. They didn't sit up on the bench. They all came down and sat around the table. But as you look around the courtroom walls, the judges, beautiful portrait, elegant, everyone was a white guy. And here we are arguing, we need to, we know what color, race, poor people are. I just thought that was just fascinating. We had a person working with us, Jessica, who we had originally helped in her VAWA case, spouse abuse, and helped her get status in the country. And then we hired her because she was so good. And I thought, this hearing the Supreme Court's going to have, it's just going to be a bunch of us lawyers yapping about how we don't have, we need more, which everybody knows we need more. So let's have Jessica testify. And so she gets to the airport in Harrington. She's never flown before. She's totally flipped out. And they canceled the flight for weather. She had already boarded the plane. So she came the next day, but by the next day, she was really freaked out about flying. But anyway, we got her to the court, and her testimony was just so powerful. I mean, you could literally, when they say you could hear a pin drop. And I'm totally convinced that her testimony got the court committed to figuring out how to get more funds into legal aid, and it's gotten a lot. It's done a really good job. Still not enough, but light years beyond where it had been, right? And that's an important structural change that went on, is the changing that funding. So now the funding for legal aid is part of the court's budget. It's not just the whim of the legislature, but it's right in the court's budget. And so you have a very conservative Supreme Court, but it's still very good on this issue. And defense, of course, defends its budget. I think in all the cases that I did, this is one I got most hate mail in from lawyers suggesting that they should do pro bono work. One called it a version of slavery. And I'll tell you, one guy sent me this picture of Gotti, who was a criminal at that time, and had my face superimposed on it. But some of the stuff was almost illiterate that I would get from lawyers. And I began to think, I actually don't really want these people to be doing pro bono work because of the consequence, But it was an important case. It's a case, too, about power because, the judges are elected and they're not going to make their friends do work for which they can charge $1,000 an hour, that kind of thing. So, but we got some change out of it. It was really important.
Of course, like fighting for these communities is so important, like on the law level. But how important was it to you, or how important do you think it is to be involved in these communities that you're fighting for? Soaking up their culture and being with them on a personal level. How important was that to you at the time as you were fighting for all these groups?
So I would say not fighting for the groups, but fighting with the groups. I think that's really important, that we lawyers have to understand up here. And so, what you're really doing is you're building relationships. You're building relationships. And the importance of that relationship is that you can motivate each other to fight harder or better. And then you can also celebrate together, when you have victories, or just at the end of the day, whatever. Molly Ivins would say, fight like hell, but party while you're doing it. And I think we have to have that sort of attitude.
Cool. Is there any advice that you would give your younger self, especially when you were first starting out, but also in times where you were struggling with the pressure that was on you to help these people and fight alongside them? Is there advice that you would tell your younger self?
Do it. Do it. Don't make excuses. Just get out there and do it. What I would tell myself was, that's more of the advice I'd give to other people. But that was where I just always try to practice that. This needs to be done, so do it.
You'd recommend that to people following a similar path nowadays?
Yeah. We need more people doing it.
Yeah. And then I wanted to ask you about your time teaching here. Why did you find it compelling to teach as an adjunct law professor? And were there any reoccurring lectures that you would do? I just wonder how that worked.
So I tried to build a really good relationship with law school groups of students, right? The Chicano law was CHELSA, Chicano Hispanic Law Association, students or something like CHELSA. And I got them to work with us when we were doing the farm worker cases. But then I also began to realize that academia was really important for a couple of reasons. One, it helped me corrupt young minds, right? So I taught law school and undergrad in the evening. And part of that was my agenda, like I said, to change the way people thought or how they might use the law and give them some ideas. UT did not have a good reputation about working on the other side of I-35 with the communities. And I wanted to do some work on that. But also teaching is really good in keeping you up to date with what's going on, you know. And and law changes all the time, so it meant that I, preparing for the classes and all of that, it was important for me just to improve my own professional performance. So it was great, and it helped me augment my already small income. And I really enjoyed it. I just taught one class a week. It was a seminar, but I really enjoyed it.
Were you approached about teaching here? Had you thought about teaching before?
Oh, I had thought about teaching ages, but I just, I don't quite remember how it happened. I think I was having a conversation with Ed Sherman, who was a law professor then, and I think I said something about teaching. I taught for a long time the Texas Bill of Rights, how it was different and better than the federal Bill of Rights. So I had something. I was the only one that had written on it, so I had that to sell. And then, and then I ended up teaching federal constitutional law and it was all the problem areas in it. And what was really funny is that I had actually litigated every kind of those cases. And the last one it was the walkout by the Round Rock students. I guess this is another fun case. Man, I really love this one. This is great, dealing with the parents and the kids. So I don't remember what year it was. A few years back, it was the national immigration protest because Congress, I guess it was Trump, was trying to further criminalize immigrants. Anyway, the students, so this was a national protest, and the Round Rock students walked out. And of course, what did the Round Rock police and school authorities do? They just arrested everybody. Free speech. I mean, this is what you should be teaching kids about, right? They're the ones who are going to govern society. So anyway, we started trying. I organized a bunch of criminal defense lawyers to do pro bono, and we started trying the cases one by one. Well, it didn't take long to realize this is going to go on for years. And some of the kids will have graduated will be out of the state. Some cases, and you have to finish the criminal case before you can bring the federal case. So what will happen is you have to bring the federal case within 2 years. So what's going to happen is a lot of these kids are going to get acquitted, but they won't be able to sue because the 2 years will have passed. And besides, it was really taxing the volunteers, the lawyers. I mean, it's a lot of time. The results were good. They were winning. But it was just slow process. So there is the last case that was in the book that I did is called Younger. And younger means you can't, if you have a situation like this, like when the cops do something and then charge you with a crime, you have to wait before you sue for until it's all over.
I just went the protests were 2017.
Okay, 2017.
So
yeah, that's
right
about
before.
2017. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, I go ahead and file a lawsuit. This is one of those you think maybe you can't. Maybe you can win, but let's give it a whirl. As one judge told me once, let's give it a whirl. So I filed the suit, and we had a hearing right away on Younger. Do we have to wait? Very narrow exceptions. to get around the rule, very narrow. So it was in January, and it snowed that day. So we did this on the phone with the judge. And the other side is yapping, is it younger, you can't do it, you can't do it. And the judge says, so we talked about the case, and the judge said, well, what if I rule that younger does apply and they can go forward? So it took about a week to settle after the judge signaled where he was going. And in the settlement, not only were all the charges erased, but the school district had to pay the lawyers of the students to expunge their records. We also got, I don't remember exactly what the payout was per student. We got something there. And the quid pro quo was the students had to have us go to a Saturday class on exercising civil rights, exercising free speech that we got to teach. And then the other thing that what I really loved is that we the money that we did not use for the expungement, that did not pay out, the fund was not exhausted, we could use for a scholarship. And so we did have that. We did do the scholarship, and the students had to write an essay. Of course, you had to do something. But the young woman who won it was talking about she'd already had a kid who was disabled. Her dad was dying, and they were divorced. She was living with her dad, and she just needed to get to ACC to work on getting her life together. So it's just such a wonderful result of that, of those students having the guts to do that, and us being there to back them up. Because if they had to, imagine how hard it'd be for them to organize to find a lawyer and raise the money to pay a lawyer to do that. But they just showed up at our door. It was really interesting.
I know this is a super broad question, but what would you say you are most proud of having done?
Farm worker cases.
Yeah, the farm
worker cases.
Yeah, is that time in your life you feel that you were helping people the most?
So, I don't look at it in terms of helping people. This is just what I needed to be doing at this particular time, working with the community, right? And there were such important cases in people's lives. They changed people's lives, or that potential, right? Even though the other cases did. But I think just having had the relationship for years and years and years that I did with the farm worker community was just super, just fantastic.
Awesome.
And it was a part of the broader movement that was going on too that was really important. The movement in Texas has a lot of ties to the farm worker movement. That went on over the years, many years. And so I think having that tie-in, because it led us to do a lot of other stuff, voting rights, police brutality, that all were cases. The grand juries cases were all cases the community was moving toward.
Are you still in contact with people that you're fighting alongside during that time?
Yeah, but let me tell you one thing that I've noted. Yes, but a lot of us have passed on. So, even when I was writing the book, a couple people that I was in contact with passed on.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, no, that's where we are. But the folks who are still around, yeah. And I'm looking forward to traveling with the book and having some tequila.
All right, so for the final part of this, I kind of just want to talk about your faith and how it's changed throughout time and like kind of what you're up to now. So you were growing up, you were Catholic, right? And so you had a switch in denomination, right? Is Episcopal now? Episcopal, sorry. How did that switch come about?
So it's a long story, right? And it's part of has to do with the structure of the Catholic Church. So this happened about 12 years ago, I think, maybe a little bit longer, right? I just got really fed up with the role that women were relegated to and the abuse going on and the rigidity of some of the clergy generally, right? The church. And I ended up moving over to the Episcopal Church because it has the same liturgy. But it's much more welcoming, much more, you have women, clergy, right? That kind of stuff. Much more democratic. And I went to St. James, which was formerly totally an African-American parish that formed back in the days of segregation at St. David's, when the blacks had to sit up in the loft. So it was a good fit, and a lot of people were involved in the same movement, parts of the movement that I was involved in. So it was a good fit.
I would love to use this opportunity to ask you about your husband as well. Did faith come into play at all, like with the Catholic Church's views on homosexual relationships? What did that play into your switch at all, away from that side of the church?
Not at that time, right? So it was basically where I was going on the women and the abuse and the rigidity. I try to deal with the bishop here on disability issues. But after I decided to come back to ministry, I would not have been able to do that in the Catholic Church because of my homosexuality, my gayness, whatever you want to call it, right?
When did the two of you, you're married, right?
Yeah.
When did you get married?
Almost a week after it became legal.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. So
we had a number of staff that ran out the door at the day the Supreme Court case came down. Yeah, we got to get married before they changed.
What's his name again?
Rolando.
How did the two of you meet?
I think it's always. I think how it happened was when through applying for a job where I was TCRP, right? It's hard to when you try to piece stuff back together. It's like, what's the moment? But I think, and I had also been. I had also taught a course at St. Ed's.
Had you, and feel free, we don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, but I'm just curious, had you always known that you were homosexual? No?
No.
That came later in life?
Yeah, so when I grew up, that word wasn't even around, right?
Right.
I remember hearing it once. I was reading a book in literature, and so I had to look it up.
Yeah.
What does this mean? And even then, the definition wasn't very clear what that meant.
Right.
No, it was a process of discernment that I went through. Yeah. So like I was talking about serendipity.
Right.
I think things came together at the right way at the right time overall. And I was married to a really great woman and had wonderful kids. So, and we're all doing fine.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And
it's a blessing.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear that. So back to the your role as a reverend, right? Or
you can call me whatever you want.
Well, what are your responsibilities like with the church?
So I'm sort of freelancing in a sense, right? I'm called a missioner because they don't know what else to call me. But what I'm really doing, so I still do stuff at St. James. Like last Sunday I did the Spanish service and sermon. But I'm also going around a lot more working on the immigrant, putting together, we have a program called Go and Do Likewise, which we raise money, and then we work with Casa Marinella, which is a refugee house. So we try to move one family a month into an apartment. In Casa, the partnership with Casa is good because they can identify the likely family to have the most success, right? Because after 3 months, they're on their own. We're not going to cover them past that. We help them get in, get the utilities. It's hard to get an apartment if you don't have a work history or, credit history in the United States, which they don't, of course, because they're here. And so our whole job is to facilitate getting the family into the apartment. And then after 3 months, we're out of the picture. And we're not necessarily even covering them for 3 months, but that is the drop dead deadline, right? So I'm doing that, a lot of that. And then the other thing I'm doing, too, are power of attorney workshops so that parents who are likely to get deported will have given a power of attorney to a family friend or family relative to provide for the kids if the parents disappear. So that involves a situation where I have one family I'm going to go work with on Saturday where the kids are teenagers. And the parents, even though it's going to be a family situation, are going to want the kids to stay here. They're very bright kids and they have a great future. And they've talked to the kids, but we have to get the papers lined up so if the parents do get deported. And then we have some cases where, that the person getting the power of attorney will actually take the kids back to whatever country, but it gives them the custody to do that. Otherwise, they go into Child Protective Services, state of Texas, which is about as close to hell as you can get.
So within the church, you're still working with a lot of the same groups?
No, I'm working with churches, principally, not necessarily. I mean, so the power of attorney workshops, we have close to 40 volunteers. We're trying to do 2 a week. And I would say the vast majority of them are not church related. On the other program, Go and Do Likewise, that is the direct pitch to the faith community, not just churches. So we have the Dialogue Institute, which is a Muslim group, participating in this too, but it's just different. And those groups you're appealing because of their faith traditions, right? And the other groups, it's just like, it could be that, but it could also be just their humanitarian instincts.
Do you think that you, how do I phrase this? Do you think you would have developed a similar intense care for these marginalized communities had religion not been such a crucial part of your early childhood? Do you think that religious background kind of shaped some of your values and the way that you looked at the world?
Sure.
Yeah.
Particularly gospel.
Gospel?
Yeah.
Cool.
Absolutely. I think that's what I learned from my grandma. Pay attention to the words, they mean something.
Yeah, I have your grandma talking about right here. Would you say that your view of religion eventually morphed into something similar to what she practiced with other people? Or that it grew into something different that kind of built off of how she used her faith?
Yeah, so I mean, that's a good question. Actually, it's probably worth another book.
Yeah.
But no, my view has certainly evolved over the years, very distinctly and in quite a different direction. But there's a core there. No matter how we're practicing our religion, our faith, right? There's still a core there to all of us, even though we end up different paths, I think. So if she were alive, we could sit down and talk to each other as people of faith, even though we were doing everything quite different from each other, even though she might not have a clue or understand well where I am or what I'm doing, right? No more than I could understand why would she feel compelled during a storm to light a candle. But that was her faith, right? I mean, even that's probably not the right time to light a candle if you're having a storm. But whatever, yeah. So I was on a panel once, ACC, And there were four of us at the front table, and all of us telling, our stories of woe, fighting the establishment, hitting our heads on the wall and all that. And this woman in the Q&A stands up. This is funny, for all the talks I've been in, this is the first time this happened. Said, "Why do you all keep doing what you're doing?" And I thought, oh, God, I hope they don't start on my end of the table. And they didn't, the other end. But every one of us said spirituality, even though every one of us had a very different idea of what spirituality was. But the fact that we all said that, I thought was really remarkable.
What do you mean by that? By the spirituality?
Because I think there's a greater grounding going on here, right? That people live into, and some might experience it in a way that I did, according to the tradition I grew up in, or somebody else in a different tradition. But I think at the end of the day, we're all going in the same direction, same place. I wrote a book with Sid Hall, was a Methodist minister. 3 mystics walk into a tavern.
Right.
And that was, bring together these leaders of the Christian, Jewish, and Sufi, Muslim spiritual traditions, right? And point out that at the end of the day, that religion is only part of that trip. That religion is not the end, right? And so all of these traditions always sort of end up in the same place. What's your ultimate relationship with God and with each other? You would think that's a no-brainer, but of course everybody wants to. All the churches and groups turn into bureaucracies. They want to protect their bailiwick. And God forbid that people want to go beyond that. So I don't think my grandmother would agree with that statement.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I know that she'd be proud of the way that you used your faith. After decades as a lawyer, I mean, how did you finally know it was time to retire that and put all your time into the priesthood and the church?
So, I think what happened is I spent almost all my time managing, because we'd grown to 40 staff, 6 offices, and you didn't have to be uniquely qualified to manage anything like that. I mean, I loved being in the courthouse, in the courtroom and all that, but it wasn't where I was at that particular time. And I just felt it was time to try something else. And I started thinking about going back into ministry. So.
And did your faith ever waver as you witnessed at times just the worst of people or situations that felt hopeless? Was there ever times you questioned what you believed?
No. And I'm not one of these people that actually, what you would call an intervention. I have an interventionist God, like, my aunt's dying, can you cure her? That kind of stuff. And then if that doesn't happen, then they don't believe in that. It's not my idea, which is kind of sometimes difficult with a priest, because a lot of people you're dealing with have those ideas of a directly interventionist God. So that's not my idea, but that's where I am.
Yeah. And then finally, we're at the end, and I just wanted to ask, why do you think it's important to fight among others, and not just to fight for your own rights, but to fight for people that are perhaps less fortunate than you? Why do you think anyone should care,
So this is the problem. I think your question is the problem with American society right now, that it has become so individualistic and selfish. If you look at history, it's a history of community. You have just maybe worse scenarios that have gone on by our ancestors or to our ancestors, right? But I think we have to keep in mind that we are a community, and that the people who went before us suffered a lot more than we're suffering. We had people that were killed because they wanted to vote, people that were lynched just a few years before in East Texas, people in the valley shot in the back by the Texas Rangers for the hell of it. You know, all those people worked, struggled for the idea to give us a better life. And we owe it to them to give the people that come after us a better life. I think that's the key. I think once you move, and there is absolutely no doubt that individuality flourishes in community. It's a reciprocal arrangement. Individuals, let's just take artists, for example, right? Contribute to the community, draw from the community, and both are better off. You cannot thrive as an individual without community, and vice versa, you know? And that's such a our economic system works against that, totally, right? Because it's individualistic, capitalistic, selfish, and works against it. It's like watch the Super Bowl. You ever see an ad? Why don't you volunteer? All the ads are, buy this and you'll be super. So that's my pitch.
Awesome. Well, thank you. That concludes our interview.
And I didn't think I could talk that long. No, I knew I could talk that long.
I could talk to you
whether
all
I have to
day.
go to the bathroom.
Awesome. Well, is there anything that you wanted to add?
Nah, I don't, whatever you. I always defer to the interviewer.
All right. Well, I think we got everything. Thank you so much for your help.
Of course.
And have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, you too. Appreciate it. Good luck to you in your future.
Thank you.